Pay close attention. What you're about to see is Bible prophecy being fulfilled.
Welcome to another edition of YPN News, bringing you the news that relates to Bible prophecy and foretold by Yeshua Hawkins. Well, in the news, Katan, one topic that we're seeing all over is the drought, not only here in the United States, but across the world. So we have many stories on that, but also one in Chicago. They're still seeing all the violence. That is not subsiding in the least. That's right. But first, we're going to start out with the Summer Olympics. Now, they're set to begin in Rio de Janeiro in August. The host nation, Brazil, is in turmoil. A crime wave has swept Rio itself. Now, law enforcement officials report murders in Rio through April 2016 were up 15% compared to 2015. And street robberies were up 24%. Now, Brazilians attribute the high crime to the country's recent recession, the worst the country has seen since the 1930s.
Oh, interesting. In an attempt to keep the area safe, authorities have pledged 85,000 troops and police to keep peace for the Games. While this sounds great, there is doubt as to the government's ability to come through on this promise. With the president, Dilma Rousseff, facing an impeachment trial and plenty of other Brazilian lawmakers also being accused of corruption, millions of people have taken to the streets in protest.
But crime and government are not the only worries. Athletes have expressed concerns about the Zika virus, which is already putting Brazilian children and mothers at risk. Now, the World Health Organization estimates more than 2,500 babies born in the country will suffer microcephaly. And as we reported before, Katan, microcephaly is a severe birth defect which causes a baby's brain to be underdeveloped. That's right, it doesn't develop fully, and actually their head itself is shrunk.
Yeah, well, fears about contracting Zika aside, the condition of the Olympic venues are disappointing the athletes as well as cause for health concerns. For example, cycling test event in May had to be postponed because the track wasn't ready yet.
But probably even more alarming is Rio's water supply. Now, athletes have complained of raw sewage. It can get really disgusting with dog carcasses in some places and the water turning brown from sewage contamination, said Thomas Lobier. Now, the 24-year-old Brazilian Olympic hopeful trains in those polluted waters.
Dogs probably died taking a drink of that sewer water. Well, a reigning windsurfing champion has called the conditions disgustingly filthy and dangerous. And Germany's sailing team has made a similar assessment, saying, "Welcome to the dump that is Rio." Wow, what a reputation to have. Despite the harsh reality, authorities have promised the Games will be safe for both athletes and the 300,000 expected visitors to open the Games to the public August 5th.
It's a lot of visitors.
It is.
Well, Chicago police, hopeful for a less violent 4th of July weekend, were dismayed at the number of fatalities and the number of injured. In all, 4 people were killed and 64 more were injured by gunfire. Now, some of the saddest incidents left children hospitalized. 2 children, ages 5 and 7, were playing in front of their home around 11 p.m. when shots were fired by an unknown offender, hitting the children in the legs. Now, 2 adults were shot as well.
That's horrible. In another incident, an 11-year-old boy was shot. At first, he thought it was just fireworks, but then he realized he had been shot and was taken to the hospital. All 3 children were reportedly in stable condition.
While no violence is ever desirable, the number of deaths went down this year to 4 from 10 last year. The Chicago Police Department believes this has a lot to do with the 70-plus arrests they have made recently of key individuals leading the violence, those the responsible, and they go on to explain it.
Well, Superintendent Eddie Johnson of the Chicago Police Department in a statement told reporters that the gun violence is driven by a small segment of people in Chicago. We have roughly 2.6 million, 2.7 million people, and when you have 1,400 individuals driving that gun violence and you start holding them accountable, it absolutely will make a huge difference.
And really, Catan, holding those perpetrators accountable is really only a small part of the answer to Chicago's problem. Remember, Yeshua Hawkins says, 2 wrongs never make a right.
That's right.
So actually educating someone on how to solve their problems peacefully instead of fighting it out is really the answer. And we'll give our viewers more information on that at the end of our broadcast.
That's right. Well, continuing on our report, we see gun violence in Chicago is not the only violence going on in the United States today. Many veterans of war are having issues controlling their anger and finding themselves being more aggressive than before they enlisted. In a study published by Army psychiatrists in 2015, anger and aggression are among the most common issues reported by returning service members from combat deployment.
Now, 2 examples of this are cop killers Micah Johnson and Gavin Long. Now, both served in the military and in war zones. Johnson with an Army engineering unit in Afghanistan, Long as a data specialist for the Marines in Iraq. While there's no indication from their service records that either of them saw actual combat, serving in countries where wars do not really have front lines ensures that almost everyone could be exposed to some form or some level of violence.
Sure, and that's got to affect people mentally.
Absolutely.
After a period of time. Johnson was released last year, being labeled a problem soldier. He was accused of sexual harassment by a woman who had asked him to seek mental help. Well, Gavin Long had been a civilian for 6 years. He actually took to expressing his anger toward the government in videos, and he can be seen saying, "You're in a world that is run by devils."
In Marine studies dating back to Vietnam War, no conclusive link between combat deployment and anger have ever been found. However, an Army study in 2013 conducted with 2,095 combat veterans found 35% of those vets getting angry enough to kick or smash something, 22% angry enough to threaten someone with physical violence, and 7% angry enough to actually hit someone. And if you remember, Catan, that high-ranking Navy officer we just showed in a recent broadcast did that very thing, threaten someone with violence.
That's right. Well, a separate study pointed to something called trait anger, defined as the propensity to become angry in times of stress. Well, in other words, Jeff, they're saying that this anger could have been a part of their characteristics before they actually joined the military. They actually said it was a personality trait in the report. Of course, you know, we know that anger is an emotion. How you handle that anger is based on your character.
That's right, and they didn't do any screenings to actually connect the two, so it's very, very possible that they developed this anger issue by serving in these war countries and coming back with this high amount of anger.
Yeah, well, the fact that we can see in all of this is they have not been trained how to properly respond to the emotion of anger. So we see a lot of these things taking place here.
Well, Texas Department of Criminal Justice and Texas Rangers are investigating the death of a Texas prison guard killed by a male inmate yesterday. Corrections Officer Marie Johnson was killed inside the Robertson unit on the northeast side of Abilene.
Officer Johnson was found unresponsive near the prison's kitchen. She was rushed to a nearby hospital where she was pronounced dead. How she died has not been released, nor the names of those responsible. Officer Johnson worked as a corrections officer for 7 years.
Well, death has been manifesting itself on more than just a human scale. Larry McGee has our story on the wastelands being created by drought. Larry, what do you have for us today?
As the devastating effects of drought continue to increase, the word being used to describe the condition of many U.S. towns is dire, with a considerable number of towns on the verge of becoming empty and barren due to a lack of water. Tulare County in California is just such a case, with 1,000 wells having perished there to date, creating living conditions that some analysts are comparing to third world countries. Towns like Lockhart to the southeast are already being referred to as desolate due to drought. It is a town which once housed hundreds, but it is now all but deserted, with 7 people reported to still remain there. It was a farming town, and when its water source died, so did it. The story is the same all across California. Ripped out orchards, abandoned homes, and brown, parched land is becoming alarmingly common, with families becoming almost entirely dependent on bottled water charity to meet their day-to-day needs. One resident of Tulare, Joanna Garcia, has taken to washing her dishes without soap, not to cut costs on detergent, but to avoid poisoning her children, whom she gives that same water to for drinking. Living in poverty with no running water, she says that if things aren't different within a year, she will be forced to move. Water tanks fill the yards of many East Potter residents, and as the drought becomes more severe, there are reports starting to surface of residents becoming aggressive with the water haulers, not wanting to have their water carried away to different locations. Residents on one occasion formed a barricade in an effort to prevent water from being taken from one well, and in another instance, the sheriff had to be contacted because of tensions. Some, like Professor Dan Sumner of UC Davis, hold out for optimism, suggesting that the agriculture around the communities of Central California have been structured to weather this sort of drought and will therefore be able to continue providing and supporting its citizens. Towns like Lockhart, however, which have already met the grave, serve as a sobering contrast to the professor's assertions. Tulare, though, has its hopes set on the prospect of a new well. Having already secured some monies through grant funding on the state level, they are hoping the federal government will be willing to pick up the remainder of the tab. California farmlands are attributed with producing almost 50% of the U.S.'s fruits, nuts, and vegetables. Of the developed water available to Californians, 80% is said to be appropriated by Big Agri. Those reported to be the most heavily affected by the industrial farm's rate of consumption are those living along the farm belt, who are often impoverished and placed into severe hardship when wells are extinguished. Another major issue presented by water shortages are the chemicals like arsenic, nitrates, and pesticides that are placed in the water by farm industries in their operations, but are not appropriately cleansed from the water, so that the level of water safety for the poor who are dependent upon it is severely compromised. The groundwater that is available is contaminated with everything from nitrates to animal waste, and exposure to nitrates themselves has been linked to a host of health complications, including rashes, thyroid problems, reproductive issues, blood disorders, and cancer. Different agencies are now banding together for legislation which would create separate water supplies for big industries and private citizens, with the aim of protecting residents from continued exposure. Other efforts are striving merely to have limits introduced for the level of known carcinogens that can be allowed in the water of cities like Arvin in Kern County, where no laws require water boards or providers to test, regulate, or treat water polluted with chemicals such as TCP, which is known to be an aggravating factor for cancer. For YPN News, I'm Larry McGee. Katan Jeff, back to you.
Well, it just looks like California isn't catching a break with any type of substantial water to fill up their reservoirs and give the crops what they need. Well, from the west coast to the east coast in New Hampshire, 7 crews from Epping Well and Pump have been working long hours for the past few weeks, helping people with the kind of well issues not often seen until late in the season. The company's owner Henry DeBoer, began his business in 1986 and commented, "I would say we're in a fairly serious situation where out of 30 years, we're headed toward the second worst I've ever seen." And he was referring to the drought conditions that we're in. Yeah, that's interesting.
Hydrogeologist Abby Fopiano says that the water levels are dropping because of lack of rain and the winter snowpack. Now, she said, what we notice is that those shallow aquifers, the sand and gravel aquifers, that water level really starts to get depleted first and then a little bit faster because those are more relying on the annual year-to-year recharge. So because they're shallow, you notice that first, as opposed to the deeper ones that, you know, hold the water because they're lower.
Yeah, that makes sense. Homeowners with shallow wells are suffering the most. Some are having to drill deeper wells because their shallow wells has no water. All of this is the result of the water table going down because of the drought. Now, people are once again being cautioned to be conscious of water usage and conserve any way possible.
Well, like they say, Catan, you don't miss the water until the well runs dry. Well, crops are also feeling the pinch of the drought. Crops are dying of thirst in Maine. Farmers are struggling to keep their crops wet, but they say it's an uphill battle. Now, farmer Milo Jackson said that if we had a couple of inches of rain, it would probably help things.
Yeah. At Libby and Sons Epping, 40 acres of farmland is being kept alive by an elaborate irrigation system. That system comprises over 80,000 feet of drip lines, which supply the much-needed inch plus of water that the crops need every week just to be sustained. Aaron Libby says drought conditions are a farmer's worst nightmare because if the fruit goes into the dormant season stressed, it'll negatively affect next year's growing season. So a drought this year will obviously affect next year's crops.
In the African continent, in Kilifi, Kenya, some 300,000 people are facing hunger due to the drought crisis. Children scramble in a small village to gather the remnants of fruit seeds left over from recent pickings. The areas that are being hit hard because fruit trees aren't bearing the much-needed staple crop for the villagers. Now, when the drought hits, women and children suffer the worst, but it's not just them. The elderly do as well. Now, because of the droughts and the lack of food, some schools are actually considering closing their doors.
Interesting. At Becker Farms, workers are trying hard to keep crops alive, tapping into fire hydrants for much needed water. Melinda Vizcarra of Becker Farms said that we haven't had a drought like this for over 20 years or more. She also said that the strawberry crops was greatly affected in harvest. Now the raspberries and blueberries are being irrigated to save them. Vizcarra said that the severe drought has created more work on the farms and thousands of dollars of additional expenses.
Wow. Well, that expense comes from the higher water bills, the extra hours for laborers caring for crops, and the additional labor of having to move the water lines for irrigation. At the farm, sweet corn is stunted because it's too far away for irrigation. Vizcarra and other farmers in New York are working double time to save their crops, tapping into water resources from hydrants and water from creeks and ponds.
Vizcarra said that the impact of this drought could also extend beyond 2016, saying that fruit, especially trees, during the time of August and September, their fruit this year determine the crop for next year. So if they're stressed, of course repeating the same thing the other farmer said, if they're stressed, they won't make a lot of fruit buds. Of course, reiterating that same saying, Jeff, and what this is actually looking like it's leading to, based on what the farmers are seeing, that we could actually see food prices start going up because the supply is not able to meet the demand. So I guess we're going to see how next year works out for us with regards to
And that's really
fruit.
dependent on whether we or not we start getting some rain and reverse that trend that's showing drought after drought after drought. Well, Western Massachusetts is also feeling the burn of the drought. Hampshire and Franklin counties are in severe drought, with the rest of the counties in a moderate drought. Now, farmers are saying that the drought is making things a lot harder. Bobby Chichi of the Chichi Farm said in the beginning of the season, the 1/4 to a 1/2 inch of rain was okay, but as the crops get bigger, it was no longer enough. It's got to have more water.
I can imagine the stress that the farmers are feeling. In the lower Pioneer Valley, they are currently 6 inches below normal for rainfall to date. And of course, to put that into perspective, that area usually gets about 3.5 inches of rain per month, so they're almost 2 months behind.
Well, the detrimental effects of El Nino has brought the worst drought to hit South Africa since 1982. As a result, millions are suffering water shortages. With water reservoirs drying up, the country's farmers have been hit the hardest. Now, 6 of one farmer's cows starved to death, with many more missing. He fears the worst. He said, "This is heartbreaking. I am losing out more than I should be gaining. It's only a matter of time before those who work for me become unemployed." That's a sad situation.
It sure is. Without some type of intervention, the stark reality facing many farmers is that more livestock will keep dying. Another farmer said that they're waiting to see what the government will do to help the farmers. This drought is going to affect our food security, he said, prices, and the poor, who everyone likes to talk about, are the ones who are going to be affected the worst.
Well, every day during the 6-month dry season, 13-year-old Rotana walked 5 miles to a pond nearby a Buddhist temple to fill 2 5-gallon buckets of water for his family. He also sometimes said a quick prayer before leaving. Rotana's family works on a sugarcane field in Cambodia, and the rest of the time they work in their rice fields. Now, with the money that they were able to save, they invested in a vegetable garden and some chickens.
That's right. But when the dry season hit, their garden and the chickens died from a lack of water. With no money from selling chickens, Rotana was forced to drop out of school. Rotana said, "My parents always told me without an education it would be hard to find a job, and I wanted to go back to school."
To help Rotana and their village solve their water problems, CBN, the Christian Broadcasting Network, dug a well for them. Now everyone has fresh, clean water to drink. Rotana said that he was so happy and excited about the new well. They also gave them vegetable seeds, chickens, ducks, and a few pigs. Well, the family was so grateful for the help that was given to them that they all decided to go to church. Rotana said, "We prayed to become Christians. I felt so peaceful inside. Now our whole family goes to church together."
That's interesting. And they were previously apparently following the Buddhist religion, but because they came in and they dug a well and gave them some seeds, that's interesting how that played into their hands. The British Parliament, in their version of confirmation for choosing their next Prime Minister, gave the candidate a pretty harsh grilling, asking tough questions about her willingness to carry out her duties under some demanding circumstances. Take a look at this short video.
So can we cut to the chase? Is she personally prepared to authorize a nuclear strike that could kill 100,000 innocent men, women and children?
Yes.
So can we cut to the chase? Is she personally prepared to authorize a nuclear strike that could kill 100,000 innocent men, women and children?
Yes.
So can we cut to the chase? Is she personally prepared to authorize a nuclear strike that could kill 100,000 innocent men, women and children?
Yes.
Oh, definitely no hesitation there.
Yeah, really. Interesting what the leaders are willing to do. Violence and aggression, wells drying up, famines and nuclear war on the horizon. It's no wonder why the nations are angry and getting angrier every day. Millions of people are starving, thousands are dying, and even though some organizations dig a well in a small remote part of the earth, no one has stopped to consider why these troubles are upon mankind and the earth. Well, Yisrael Hawkins of the House of Yahweh is spreading the message of truth as to why the earth is wasting away, what mankind has done to cause it, and what will be the end result of mankind's ways, as well as what the Creator says through the inspired Holy Scriptures needs to be done to turn this thing around. Contact the House of Yahweh to find out about life-saving information, and when you do, ask about receiving a free copy of the Prophetic Word magazine and the monthly newsletter.
To contact the House of Yahweh, you can write them at P.O. Box 2498, Abilene, Texas 79604. You can call them at 1-800-613-9494. Visit them on any of their websites, www.yahweh.com, www.yisraelhawkins.com, or www.yahwehsbranch.com. You can also visit our website at www.ypnnews.com. For any emails, you can email them at info@yahweh.com. And any calls from outside the United States, please call the number on your screen. And once again, we're going to remind you about the Yisrael Says program, the best and the greatest study tool out there on the market today. You can check them out at www.yisraelsays.com. To answer all your scriptural questions, go to yisraelsays.com.
Well, for those of you who thirst, come and drink freely of the waters of life as taught by Yisrael Hawkins. From all of us here at YPN News, I'm Katan Alexander.
And I'm Jeffrey Heimerman.
Thank you for watching.